Venezuela, corre en mi alma y en mis venas, representando a mi bandera.
Humanitarian aid has a very distinct definition. You have to start by saying that Venezuela is not undergoing a humanitarian crisis, although we are having an economic difficulties like many other countries have. But usually, when you talk about humanitarian crisis, you need to have something else happen before, like it could be a natural disaster or in the middle of a war, some sort of conflict where you were really blocked from actually food supplies or medicine supplies and that sort of thing. That's not what's going on in Venezuela. We have economic difficulties where you may have high inflation, you may have some of these problems, but people have access to medicine and food. What we do have though is some problems acquiring some of these products because of sanctions or what we call unilateral coercive measures that are being applied by the United States and by some of its allies against Venezuela. Part of these sanctions involve the blocking of our assets and our accounts in the way that we can make necessary purchase in an opportune time frame where we could get some things that are needed for the country's development, for the food supply, medicine, etc. in Venezuela. So when they talk about bringing this aid to Venezuela, even the numbers they portray is kind of laughable. I mean, in the last year, it's about $23 billion have been blocked in Venezuelan accounts and assets, and they're talking about bringing aid in the terms of $20 million, which is nothing compared to what has been blocked. If there was any real concern about the Venezuelan people, about the problems we're facing as a nation, about our difficulties, what we would do is lift those so-called sanctions on Venezuela and find ways to help us develop. This is definitely a publicity stunt. This is destined to portray the government as an oppressive government, or somebody that's not open to outside relations and so forth. But at the end of the day, this is all a way of promoting regime change in Venezuela. We've seen this before as well. I mean, in our history, in our continent, we've had cases. I'll give you one that's that's very similar. In 1965, the Dominican Republic had a very autonomous government led by Juan Bosch, and you had all of a sudden there was a move in the region to declare the Dominican Republic was undergoing a humanitarian crisis and needed humanitarian aid, and the Organization of American States approved the so-called sending of aid. And yes, at the beginning you have some food boxes, and then came 8,000 Marines, took over the island, overthrew the government, and installed a new government that was friendly to U.S. interests. So this is not something that that we haven't seen before, and it sort of follows a pattern. What they're trying to do in the next few days is trying to force, or not even force, but try to show that they're bringing aid and the government is not receiving it and that it's insufficient. So first you bring this aid, and then the pattern is that then you have people requesting it, and then you need to have troops come in and keep the peace, and that's at the end of the day what you have is a whole process of invasion. So it's a pattern, it's a script. We've seen this before, and we know that this is what it's aimed at. At the end of the day, I mean, what we're talking about is, we're facing difficulties. We're not even asking people to give things to Venezuela. We have money in our accounts. This is an oil-producing country. There's revenues from oil production. Yes, the oil prices have been low, and that's been part of our economic problems in the last few years, but we have some revenue. But the thing is, we can't use it. I mean, we have the money goes into accounts and stays frozen for months, if at all. It returns, and we haven't been able to do the purchases. What we're asking is, we're receiving aid from Russia, like you said, but there's some medicines and some products that are coming in that we're paying for. I mean, we're not. These are not donations in that sense. I mean, this is something, and that's what we're asking. If there was a real interest in the European Union or in the United States to help the Venezuelan people, then give us access to those products so that we can bring them in. The truth is, this is a pattern where they want to build the conditions so that people exasperate, and there's a strong media campaign. There's a strong campaign in cell phones by messages, rumors of something's going to happen. The aid needs to come in, and getting people in tension, so that at the end of the day you could promote what they're really after is that the military does something against the government and overthrows the president. And if you look at all the accounts of the high officials from the United States that are getting involved, and you have congressmen, you have people from the State Department, you have people from the White House. All they do is say the military should allow this to happen. The military has a duty to allow this. So it's a message to military in Venezuela that they do something against the government. So it's very clear that at the end of the day, they want to promote tensions so that the military turns against the president, turns against the Constitution, and sets up a government that is friendly to corporate interests outside. Again, it's difficult. There's different factors that create an economic crisis, as we know, and we just mentioned something before. Oil prices for a country that its main export is oil. The rise and fall of oil prices has an effect, and since 2014 prices went down, and that definitely had some issues. But at the end of the day, I mean, if we're blocked, if we have, and I'll tell you this, there's a political aspect of attacks against Venezuela that have been going on for many years now, and for example, Venezuela has had poor country risk ratings in its bonds. Because as part of the campaign, even though we met our commitments before the sanctions in the U.S., we met our commitments, we made our payments in time, and still we had risk factor higher than other countries such as maybe Chile, whose payments were not as effective as the ones that Venezuela made. And those risk factors have risen, making our dues in interest higher than other countries. For example, part of the blockade that is now going on against Venezuela is that shipments are now being asked to make 3-4 stops more than they usually were asked to in the past. Every time you make one of those stops, that's going to have a charge of port for the port requirements. So you increase expanding. You block the transactions from Venezuela so that Venezuela can't use dollars in some accounts. So you have to switch currencies to maybe euros or another currency. Once you make that switch, just last year, what we lost in making the conversion from dollars to euros, we could have covered a whole year's supply of HIV medicines in our public hospitals. But we had to lose it in commissions to trade, currency. So this is part of limitations that have been put on the Venezuelan economy that end up affecting Venezuelan people. So it's not fair to say that this is something about the program, the socialist program. On the contrary, if it were not for a well thought out policy of helping people with certain subsidized food products, and there's a monthly box that we call CLAPSUS, a Committee of Local Supply and Production, that families and communities get, with a lot, it's the basic foodstuffs that you could hold you out for about a month and so, and it's on a it's very accessible for the people and subsidized prices. If it were not for those type of measures, we would really be deep in in a crisis because of all these political attacks or politically motivated attacks on our economy.